Good evening to everyone watching. We'd like to thank you for tuning in this evening to our first ever panel discussion here at Trinity Missionary Baptist Church. On behalf of our church and our church family, I'd like to thank you for talking about this discussion even before we actually got to this day to engage in the actual discussion. This evening, we are having a live Facebook discussion centered around the title, A Difficult Conversation on Race, Racism, and Injustice from an African-American Perspective. Some of you may have asked, why a discussion on race from an African-American perspective? Well, I believe that perspective is essential because one's perspective shapes one's priorities, and one's priorities shape what one does in practice. I must say that African Americans are not a monolith in their perspective. All African Americans do not share the same perspective regarding race, racism, and injustice concerning education, media, healthcare, law enforcement, judicial system, politics, and economics. Thus, we need to have a conversation between those who may have similar or opposing views. I like to personally thank everyone who worked extremely hard to make sure that this day and this event came to pass. I'm grateful for everyone who contributed to this event. Even as we said, if it was just spreading the word. I'm thankful for all of our panelists who are with us on tonight. There are some who are not here yet, and then there are others who will not be able to make it. I'm looking forward to being educated, enlightened, equipped, and empowered to action in those areas where I'm being pulled to make a difference. Two of our panelists couldn't be with us on this evening. Kadada Hawkins couldn't make it for personal reasons, and Reverend Dr. Reginald Calvert called about 3 hours ago and said that he would not be able to make it due to the fallout from inclement weather down in an area called Hueytown. Also, the Birmingham area sustained a lot of damage from a violent storm. And so Pastor Dr. Calvert told me, he said, I just can't be there. He said, I have to help my elderly family members actually get power restored to their home. And so as we said this morning, and it's kind of ironic, this morning in the message we talked about having a bad day. And the important thing is not so much for us to try not to have a bad day, but it is how we respond when we're actually having a bad day. And I'm glad that Dr. Calvert didn't make it about himself and still try to get here. He made it about someone else, about his loved ones, so he could be there to make a difference. And so I told him, I said, give me some things that you would say, and he shared about 4 things with me that hopefully I'll get a chance to share with you a little later on in the panel discussion. I'm sure that tonight's panel discussion will be the first of many discussions needed during a time when many people desire to engage and listen to a difficult conversation that moves beyond empty rhetoric and non-action-oriented cliches. We need to adequately examine many of the problems that we face today that cannot be successfully resolved without critical analysis, evaluation, synthesis, and the creation of practical solutions to combat the systemic problems that plague African American communities and beyond. I want to share with you our threefold goal for tonight. Number 1, it is to educate and enlighten others with truth. Number 2, it is to expose erroneous beliefs and behaviors. And then thirdly, to empower others to move beyond their position of complacency and unconcern, apathy, and be moved to action and viable activity that creates lasting partnerships that work synergistically to overcome racism and injustice at all levels. As we move forward tonight, I want to say that we're going to engage in a difficult conversation, but we'll do that in the most respectable manner. I'm glad to be in the position that I'm in tonight. On several occasions, I've been where these panelists are tonight, and that's on the answering question end. So on tonight, I get a chance to be in a position I've yet to be in, and that's asking questions. And so I'm not going to make this about myself on tonight. I want to give our panelists plenty of time to answer questions, for us to get a feel of them, get to know them, because everyone may not know our panelists. But at certain points, I may do follow-up questions. I may interject some quotes here and there. But for the most part, it's about you hearing from our panelists on tonight. We're over 50 years removed from the Civil Rights Movement. We've had a black president, 2 terms, 8 years, Barack Hussein Obama. According to Business Insider, as of June the 12th, 2020, there are 615 billionaires in the United States, and only 6 of them are African American. Robert Smith, worth $5 billion. David Stewart, worth $3.5 billion. Oprah Winfrey, worth $2.6 billion. Michael Jordan, worth $2.1 billion. Kanye West, worth $1.3 billion. And Sean Carter, AKA Jay-Z, worth $1 billion. I can go to Helen Keller website and look under leadership, and the president of Helen Keller is a black man. I can go to my family physician. He's a black man, and he owns his own practice. I can look to local politics and see that a black man ran for the position of House of Representatives for the 5th Congressional District and lieutenant governor in Alabama. I can look to a young activist who is on the precipice of getting a Confederate monument moved from in front of the local courthouse, and who owns her own local daycare facility and multiple venues. I can look to a young African-American pastor who is studying for his Doctorate of Divinity degree. I can look to an African-American pastor who matriculated at a predominantly white seminary in Alabama and obtained his Doctorate of Divinity degree. I can look to an African-American police officer who has been part of the local police department for over 30 years, and I could conclude that we live in a post-racial society. Let me repeat that. I could conclude that we live in a post-racial society where blacks have made great strides and achievements, and conclude that surely in July of 2020, there's no such thing as racism. After Barack Obama was elected, the conservative radio host Lou Dobbs said in November 2009, "We are now in the 21st century post-partisan, post-racial society." 2 months later, Chris Matthews, an MSNBC host, said of President Barack Obama, "He is post-racial by all appearances. You know, I forgot he was black tonight for an hour." After Barack Obama's farewell speech, or at his farewell speech, he acknowledged this: "After my election, there was talk of post-racial America. Such a vision, however well-intended, was never realistic. Race remains a potent and often divisive force in our society." I want to begin tonight by asking our panelists, what do you think? Do you think we're living in a post-racial society where race doesn't matter? And what has been your experience with racism? Take a few minutes to tell us a little bit about your background and who you are, and how you've been affected by racism. That is, if you think that we do not live in a post-racial society.
I guess I will start off, go in a linear position here. Thank you, Pastor Crenshaw, first of all, for this invite, and thank you for doing this panel discussion, which is very important, very very relevant nowadays, relevant always, but particularly nowadays. My name is Wesley Thompson. I am a pastor here in the Shoals area, pastor of Bethel Colbert Missionary Baptist Church in Leeton, Alabama, where I proudly have served for 3 years. As Pastor Crenshaw noted, I'm studying for my doctorate of ministry degree at Mercer University, and I'm studying particularly looking at the unsung heroes, if you will, of black preachers, particularly preachers of the Alabama State Missionary Baptist Convention, and looking at what they preached in pivotal parts during the Civil Rights Movement between 1955 and 1965, to be to be specific. I am one who believes that as a pastor, I have an obligation to not only have a voice, but also have a presence when it comes to fighting alongside the forces and the activists of racial justice, and I've done my best to do just that. As far as that question, no, we do not live in a post-racial society, point blank period. That is easy to answer. Black faces and black spaces does not equal to black fairness and black equality. I think that is very important for us to realize. It's easy to put a black woman or a black man in a CEO position, in a U.S. Political office, in a law, and to put them in a medical building, in a law firm building. And don't get me wrong, that is great progress, but that does not mean that we as a people have made it. I'm reminded of the Jeffersons. Of course, that theme show that came out in the 70s.
Moving on up
to the east side. The first episode of the Jeffersons, many of you recall the character Florence, who was the maid. Well, she, in the very first episode, of course, she is called to the home of George and Louise, and she goes there and she sees that they have moved on up to a deluxe apartment in the sky, and she makes a statement in the first episode of the Jeffersons. She said, well, if we've overcome, how come nobody told me? And I believe that that is the narrative for so many of our fellow African-American brothers and sisters, that just because there are a few of us who have that face in that space, that does not mean our community as a whole has overcome or has made it. And racism does still exist. It's funny you asked that because I just experienced that this past Monday. Quickly tell this story. I am a hospice chaplain, and there was a patient who I had not made a connection with at the time, but she passed away all of a sudden, and the husband was very distraught, so the nurse called me in to provide spiritual support. Once again, the patient's husband or the family had never laid eyes on me. So when I got to the home, I knocked on the door. The patient who just died, her sister answered the door. She had this surprised look on her face. I said, hello, my name is Wesley. I'm the chaplain, just came in to visit. I proceeded to take 1 foot in, and she stopped me. She said, hold on, let me talk to you outside. And she gives me a great big hug, and she says, I'm sorry, young man, but my brother-in-law is very prejudiced against black people, and he did not know you were black. I'm not sure if he's okay with you coming in. And I understood. I said, I understand he's in a very emotional, sensitive area right now. He just lost his wife. I then asked her to go inside, tell him that I am a black man. If he is okay with me coming in, I will be more than happy to do that. But he's not okay with it, I'm also perfectly fine with that. I waited outside a good 4 or 5 minutes, so she did come back outside and eventually tell me that it was okay to come in. And, you know, it was handled well. He was kind of standoffish at first, but it ended up being a good introduction, a good conversation. However, there are 2 chaplains that serve in the hospice I work with. I'm the black, the other chaplain is white. That other chaplain will never have to experience waiting outside in a hot garage to be welcome in the home because he's white. Only people who look like me experience things like that in 2020. So racism is still very real, as prevalent as just a week ago for myself.
And you are, I believe, a man of integrity. You are not making this story up.
No.
Just to say that racism is a reality.
No, this happened last Monday.
In 2020, racism is still a reality.
Yes.
I'm Camille Bennett, the founder of Project Say Something. I founded it in 2014, and our mission, in short, is to confront racial injustice in Alabama and throughout the Mid-South. I'm also the co-owner and director of Focus Scope Child Enrichment Centers, two in West Florence, we're just opening our new one, and one in North Florence. And I'm also a spiritual leader for Living Spirit Center for Spiritual Oneness. That's a loaded question, Pastor Trevor. Are we in a post-racial society? And you're reminding me of the Obama years. Those were our glory years. Those are the years where I literally told my sons, it may be over. You may be able to experience equity in this country.
You actually said that?
Yeah, I actually did. Those are my sleeping years. And I will say also I was very tired. I was a mom, so I was really sleepy. But when I became woke, it was after the Ferguson riots, and maybe a year prior, I started to study Black history and really tap into what happened and why things look the way they look today. The awakening meant for me looking around my own community, right? We always are really comfortable looking at what things are happening or what's happening nationwide, but we're very uncomfortable looking at what's happening right here. And that led me to founding Project Say Something, because what I found is we have serious problems with race right here. And if I had any doubt, my first hint to how much racism exists here was the resistance I had just from trying to found an organization that focuses on racial injustice. So one of the questions I was asked over and over again was, how can you see racial injustice here in the shows? We're beautiful. We got the Handy Festival. We got fame, and we made this documentary, Muscle Shoals Sound, where the Black people and the white people came together and made amazing music. I mean, you're not seeing race riots here. What are we talking about? But nevertheless, as they say, she persisted. And I'll speak to where we are in this moment in time. Right now, we are campaigning and protesting, the first time, I believe, in history in the shows to actually have a sustained protest. That means we've been doing this 5 days a week.
You remember what I told you? It can't be a moment. It has to be, and it's going to be
absolutely.
A movement. Yeah.
And it's been a movement. We've been here for almost 7 years, and trust and believe, once the monument's down, we'll continue to focus on systemic racism. But in any case, what's happening right now is we are protesting to bring down and relocate a Confederate monument and we're demanding it right now because of what's happening in our nation. We've seen the lynching of Black bodies over and over again. And the question I ask myself is, what can we do right here, right now, to really put a small dent in systemic racism and really focus in on it? So this was a really small ask, but the results have been catastrophic. When you want to talk about overt racism or racism here, death threats are my everyday existence. We've been called cockroaches. We've been called jungle bunnies. We've had business owners talk about bringing Popeye's chicken and watermelon to our protests. We have seen racism from our politicians, our judicial system, business owners, nurses. We've seen teachers. There is actually currently a Facebook group with over 3,000 members that's to counter-protest this movement, which means they are truly racist, because if you're counter-protesting and asking for a symbol of overt racism to stay in front of a judicial business or a business that represents the justice system, then you have some serious problems with race. So when asked the question, are we in a post-racial society, my reality says absolutely not.
Thank you.
I'm Will Boyd. I serve in a number of roles. I'm the pastor of St. Mark Missionary Baptist Church, a 160-year-old church in Florence, Alabama. I serve as the presiding bishop to over 1,000 churches worldwide in different countries. I'm a former educator. I've served as a dean and a professor at the collegiate level. Also, I should have thrown in first, a husband and a father to three children. I've held a number of posts, a number of roles, and just to be specific about where we are in this time, I would say absolutely not. We're not in a post-racial environment. As a matter of fact, before coming out here, I was reading an article about backlash that is obviously occurring because of where we are right now. Pastor Crenshaw, thank you.
Now, are you trying to distinguish between white lash and black lash?
Well, what's happening now, some people think that because we're in a place where we've seen everyone coming together, almost like the 60s marching together, and perhaps they believe we're advancing and moving forward, that it's going to be better for African Americans. However, some African Americans are bracing for it to get worse. When President Obama was elected, I'll never forget, I have oversight of both Caucasian and African Americans, just to make it very clear, very plain. And I don't have, I would say, a racist cell in my body. However, the day President Obama was elected, you would have thought I personally put him in office, because many of my white constituents, many of my white people that I serve left the organization that I oversee as if there was a problem.
Bishop, we want to make sure we can hear you, so we're going to switch that mic out. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
That just happens to be the title of one of my 3 books. Can you hear me now? I was explaining that people believe that there's going to be backlash occurring because we're in a place where we think that we're moving forward. And you've heard the phrase, we take 1 step forward and we end up taking 2 steps backwards. So absolutely not. I've obviously been the nominee for Congress, the 5th Congressional District. I've been the nominee for Lieutenant Governor of our great state of Alabama. And one of the most disheartening things I've seen as I traveled this great state of Alabama is people, white and black, tell me that I'm the most qualified person, including a governor who served as governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and secretary of state. He said, Dr. Boyd, you're the most qualified person to ever run for this seat. But what ends up happening is you run into people behind closed doors that say, but a black man can't win and be lieutenant governor. So I think people have had aspirations of...
And why is that, Bishop? Why is it that they feel that you can't win? I mean, Barack Obama won the president, so why is it that you can't win?
Well, I'll give you an example. When I ran for the U.S. Senate race, as Doug Jones, my good friend, and I were on the ballot together, I sat in front of a group of people who said they know that my platform is the platform they want to see. And this was a predominantly African-American group. They said they know I'm the one that has everything that would take us where we need to be as a state. But they did not believe that I could get the white vote. And as a result, the person who won, my good friend Doug Jones, he actually got in primarily because of the African-American vote from females, obviously, and many other factors that played into it. So it's interesting to me, and I'm probably going to be a little bit abrasive in this statement or eye-opening in this statement. I'm not concerned about people showing up at my door with white sheets over their head and burning crosses. I'm more concerned about the people behind desks who wear shirts and ties like I do and dresses and high heels, but they're stopping people like us from getting to places that we're qualified to be. So that's my problem in this post-racial
So are you telling me that you were not the right kind of black person, or you were not
I was
the
not
white
the right
person?
color. Let's make it plain.
Yeah.
I was not the right color. And some people tend to believe that even today. Even in our own African-American communities, we believe it's not possible. You know, I came in with the intention tonight of talking about how we need to help the college-educated people become more aware, more able to articulate our platforms, our beliefs, and why we need to see systemic racism addressed and changed. But if you look at the math or look at the numbers, in the last race where Doug Jones won against Roy Moore, and I'm not getting into Democrat or Republican platforms, 44% of the people who showed up, college educated, were white, but less than 20%, actually 14% African American showed up who are college educated. So the struggle is, how do we get people who know what's right, who can articulate values and beliefs best, to help spread that into communities, to support people like Camille and others who are doing what we want to see done. And right now, we just don't have enough people on the front lines who are really buying into the idea that it's possible.
And I want to come back to that, because I want to see if it's possible that low percentage may be because, and let me put it this way, when I worked in a barbershop, I used to hear a lot of young African American males say, I'm not voting because my vote don't count. I don't care what you say, I don't care how you say that this candidate can do this, can do that for us. I'm not voting because my vote is not going to count anyway. And I want to get into that.
You can.
Not at the moment.
Okay.
We'll come back to that.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Officer Johnson, I don't think you were here when I did the opening monologue, so I'm going to go back just a minute, just kind of give you a little bit of the context into which I've asked this question. Without calling names, I kind of identified the area of you all's expertise and some of the accomplishments that you recently made or either in your past have achieved. And I talked about President Barack Obama and his time as president, other African Americans who in some ways people look at them as exceptions. And I asked the question, do you believe that we live in a post-racial society? Do you believe that racism is still present? And if you do, or based on your answer to that question, what has been your experience with racism? And at the same time that I'm saying this to Officer Johnson, Dr. Buchanan, Dr. Jones, this is also for you all as well, because as soon as he addresses this question, I want to hear from you all as well in regards to this. And Dr. Jones, we may have to swap out a mic with you or swap back and forth, and we'll do all we can. We do have sanitizers up here, and we'll make sure that we keep things sanitized. So, Officer Johnson?
Yes, sir. Wow, I've been very fortunate. I'm from Florence. I've lived here all my life. I was in the service. I was in the Marine Corps for 4 years after high school. Came back, police officer in Sheffield for 2 years. The remaining time I'm a police officer, currently a police officer in Florence. I have not dealt with racism that much, believe it or not. I really have not. I've seen several incidents. One incident, I've talked with a supervisor on a police department, and he's black. And with him being a black supervisor, and he has officers that work underneath him, the white officers, when there's a need for a supervisor, they always call upon the white supervisor. They never call upon the black supervisor. That's one of the reasons why I haven't looked at the goal of becoming a supervisor, because I felt like I could potentially fall under that situation. I did talk with that supervisor on that note. On the job within the department I work in, I've talked to a lot of citizens that has complained, has had issues, and they've come to me. And I point them in the right direction to file their complaints, who felt like they have been targeted or done wrong by a white officer. I'm not in the loop to know the outcome of those investigations where people have complained. Some of the people that have come to me and complained to me, I have determined that after talking with them and pointing them into the right direction and let them know who to talk to, they very rarely follow up and do that.
Why do you think that is?
To me, I think they feel more comfortable talking to someone that's like them. African American, if it's Hispanic, I feel like they feel more comfortable talking to someone Hispanic. But I would say probably 60% of the people who has come to me, who has stopped me on the road to complain, very rarely go to the police department and follow up and complain.
Do you think there needs to be someone, as far as a representative, African-American persuasion, Hispanic persuasion, who could actually engage that person and help them feel comfortable?
Yes, sir, I do. As we all know, the police departments are hurting as far as recruiting officers. We have just recently they've hired 3 African-American officers, young officers. Normally in a 110-man department, it's maybe 4 or 5 African-Americans. We've lost half of those due to retirement and whatnot. They have hired 3 more. I've seen them on the road. They're new. I very rarely talk to them. I see them.
And that, Officer Johnson, brings a total of African American officers in the Florence City Police Department to how many?
I don't know the exact number, but I believe it's about 5 or 6, maybe 7. Maybe 7. But I've been very fortunate. I have had white people call me names. I have had that. I guess that would be a bit of racism, them calling me out of my name, using the N-word.
You don't have to feel uncomfortable in any way saying that's racist, or that's someone being prejudiced, or someone being bigoted. I think in the day and time in which we're living in, we need to call these things for what they are.
Yes, and you're probably correct. In my line of work, I feel that people do those things to try to make me act.
I don't disagree with that, Officer Johnson, but what I'm saying is, even though they do it, let's call what they're doing what it is. How you deal with that, that's on you. But what they're doing to you, that's on them. And we need to call what they're doing to you what it is. I know the position you're coming from, because you feel as though a police officer, I don't need to be reactive. The thing that I teach the cadets, a bar, breathe, acknowledge, and respond. That's what you're engaging in. But we still can call what it is what it is. I feel as though we need to.
And you may be right, sir. Yes, sir. But, wow, I've had very little insults as far as racism. I have. I've lived in California for 4 years. Although you have all kind of nationalities there, people seem to mix real well and do fine. That's about the only place I've been other than here.
Thank you very much. So we'll move to Dr. Buchanan.
Good afternoon. I'm Kyle Buchanan. This is the doctor right here, Dr. Johns. I'm just Kyle.
I was doing that just in case, because I've yet to meet you. This is my first time meeting you. So I said what I'm going to do. I'm going to call him Dr. Buchanan, and if he's not, then we can go down. just in case you were.
I'm a native of Tuscumbia. I grew up on 8th Street in Tuscumbia. I'm fortunate to move around quite a bit, and my wife and I, who's also a Florence native, were able to move back here 11 years ago. So post-racial society is something that I'm not sure where exactly that term came from. I often thought of 2008 as we all sat there tearfully watching President Obama accept the nomination and then later with the oath of office. We all thought, okay, we've taken a step, but never in my mind did I think we were beyond hundreds of years of racism with a single election or a single event. And that's from a national perspective. Locally, we've all seen examples. I can list you several in which personally I and my family have been in situations in which you just know it's a racist situation. You just know you're being followed. not because I'm bald or because my running shoes in the dark light up. No, it's because I'm suspicious because of my color. That's just what that is.
But
now,
you're the president of a doctor. I mean, the president of a hospital.
And that's
You shouldn't be faced with racism. So some people would say, because we live in a post-racial society.
Well, I would counter that with the fact that regardless of what roles we have, what education we may have, or what our experience is, and what responsibilities we may have in the community, there are just some people, not everybody, but some people are just going to see you as a 37-year-old black man. And whatever their thought is about 37-year-old black man, they're going to apply that to you regardless of whether you got a tie on or whether you've got your daughter's Father's Day t-shirt on. So with regards to how, which I think is where we are now, how do we react to these things? How do we push the needle forward to try to make effective change and make change is going to last? Now, we will never, and I'll say this, and this may be provocative and we may have disagreement, I think we're a long way from being in a post-racial society. We have so much work to do. But that comes one small step, one chip at a time, in which we all have a very specific role to play in moving us forward as a community.
No, I would totally agree. And I think what happened in 2008 and when we moved into President Barack's tenure in the office was, maybe we are there, but we were not, because kind of got lulled into this sense of comfort. And I know I was comfortable. I was enjoying those 8 years. And, but we did not look at the reality of there's a whole lot of work that needs to go into actually making a post-racial society that some people are unwilling to do. And I would add to that, when some people see people doing that work, they get offended, because it just might mean that some things that have been a cultural norm will be no more.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Javar Maya Jones, and I'm going to give a different take on this with my experience, what I experienced coming along. So I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, predominantly AfricanAmerican city. I graduated from Morehouse College, predominantly AfricanAmerican college, historical black college. And during my time, when I was coming along and I was getting ready to apply to medical school, and at the time, I wore braids in my hair. And I was told repeatedly by people that look like me, people who don't look like me, you have to cut your hair. You have to clean up. You have to clean yourself up. You have to look presentable. You have to look something something better than what you're looking like right now. And ignoring my scholastic achievements in college, ignoring my dedication to the community, ignoring my community service, ignoring all of that, what was brought out is that I had to cut my hair. Needless to say, I didn't cut my hair. I got accepted to medical school, did well in medical school. During my time in residency looking for a position, I trained on the north side of Chicago, predominantly Caucasian white area. The hospital system there was recruiting me for a position. Now there were approximately 4 or 5 positions available on the north side of Chicago where I trained. But the positions that was offered to me were all on the south side of Chicago. Ignoring my chief resident position at the program, I was chief executive resident. my last year, did fairly well during my residency, never got a bad recommendation from any of my preceptors. However, when it was come down to it, it was determined that the only way I would be successful in the medical field there is if I practice on the south side of Chicago. Now, I don't know if that's racism, a business decision, whatever the case may be, but I felt like I was being judged only because of the color of my skin.
It could have been both. Some business decisions are racist.
Yeah. So, I bring all that up to say that, we need to work. We have a lot of work to do in this post-racial environment to change our perspective of how we view ourselves, and we need to work on how people view us. Yeah, I've encountered issues locally by me I've been in the area for 4 years now, and I've encountered issues where some of my Caucasian patients came and told me that they were told by coworkers who look like me that they shouldn't come see a black doctor. And I hear that on more than one occasion, because I guess black doctors aren't as well taught, aren't as well educated as Indian doctors or white doctors. And so we need to really work on the perceptions, how we view ourselves and how others view us as well.
I totally agree, because that's what this is all about from an African-American perspective, which deals with perception. Because what we do in practice eventually comes out of the initial perspective or perception. I remember watching an episode of Sanford and Son. Fred was like, I need to go to the dentist. So Lamont takes him to the dentist. I want a white dentist. He said, I don't want a black dentist. Black dentist comes in, Fred's mouth get all tore up. There wasn't no black dentist. The black dentist go out, white dentist comes in, looks in Fred's mouth, goes right back out. The black dentist comes in. He says, open your mouth and wide so I can stick my foot in it. Sometimes, as you said, Dr. Jones, we have to change the perspective that we have even about our own people and ourselves. So I wanted to ask you all some questions tonight, and I'll start with Pastor Thompson. Over the past few years, and specifically in recent weeks, we've seen much activism and protest, racism, police brutality. Many people consider it to be a modern-day 21st century civil rights movement. In the 1960s, civil rights movement was founded by and led by African-American churches and African-American pastors. Are African-American churches and pastors leading this current movement that we see on a national, regional, and local scale? Why or why not?
First of all, let me go back to the question. I think I've worded something wrong. You think about something. I made the comment, black faces and black spaces doesn't equate to black equality. I'm going to say black faces and privileged places doesn't equate to black equality. But going back to the question, are African-American churches, African-American leaders at the forefront leading this present-day 21st century, if you will, as some will call it, civil rights movement? Be honest with you, no. That is something I do not take delight in saying, but I'm just being honest and being realistic. However, I don't believe that is a horrible thing, because we are seeing progress being made. Of course, the foundation of the 1960 civil rights movement was birthed literally out of the black church. I mean, those first few meetings to organize the Montgomery bus boycott was done in the basement of churches with African-American pastors and clergy in the Montgomery area. Now in this 21st century, whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement or local movements such as Project Say Something, it's really being led by a community effort, a community that some are within that community are pastors, within that community are atheists, within that community are LGBTQ, within that community are white and black and different ethnicities. It's a melting pot, if you will, of people who have a heart and a passion and a care for justice, who are coming together. I do believe that the church has a place, and that place should be at the forefront of leading the effort. But our churches in general, nationally and on down, have not honestly taken that rightful place, as I know myself personally would like to see it. Nevertheless, what gives me hope is that community I just spoke of. They are doing the work of Jesus. I want to say this. When that 1960s civil rights movement was led and they marched and they organized, they mobilized, that was 100% the work of Jesus by the believers and people of Jesus. Today, what you see is the work of Jesus, but not necessarily being done by people who know Jesus. So to me, we as the church could make such a significant, major impact if we do better at stepping outside the confines of our holy place, our sanctuary, and joining those who are doing the work of Jesus, and by joining them, our light having a domino effect prayerfully, and we can maybe introduce them at the least, or perhaps maybe even have them get to know this person of Jesus. And when the people who know Jesus step outside the church to join the people who don't know Jesus but are doing the work of Jesus, what a powerful combination I believe that can be, because the people who are doing the work right now honestly are cutting edge. They are doing and making magnificent, significant progress and change. However, Martin Luther King, he did not separate the pulpit from the public place. And I believe that we as pastors particularly have to recognize our role not only as pastors in the congregations, but prophets for the community. That word prophet a lot of times is misconstrued. When you hear the word prophet, you make it think of somebody who tells you that if you send them $2 in the mail and they're going to send you a blanket or some holy water and your life is going to be changed. Or you think of a prophet, somebody who is foretelling, a prophet, somebody who is telling your future, which, don't get me wrong, that is a characteristic of a prophet. But honestly, the foundation and the basic meaning of being a prophet is somebody who simply speaks truth to power, and all of us.
So then you get into foretelling and forthtelling.
Forthtelling, yes.
Whereas those prophets also spoke to the present. As Isaiah looked down through the annals of time and spoke about the coming of Jesus, and he gives these names, he also needed to speak to the present condition and situation that was going on at the time.
Yes, they were prophetic. Those major prophets and minor prophets were prophetic by not only calling out sin, but also calling out systems. And we have to make sure that we use both our voice and our presence to, of course, as we are called to do as ministers of the gospel, call out sin, but also call out the systems that have a major effect on the people that we serve, the people that we are in community with. So to answer your question, our churches, our pastors are not leading that. They are a part. I will say they are a part, but they are not leading. However, I do not believe that's a bad thing. But I do believe that we have to make sure that we don't critique the work that we're seeing from those that are on the front lines just because they don't know Jesus, just because their lifestyle is different. Their lifestyle may be one that some people in the church traditionally do not agree with. That does not mean we should stay at home with our arms folded and saying, I'm not being a part of that. We need to learn how to honestly, for the sake of our people, for the sake of the greater good of society, learn how to simply do justice, do righteousness, and do love by, and if that takes joining others who don't necessarily believe like we believe or live like we live, that's okay. That's okay.
So let me play the antagonist for just a minute, and we're going to get to the question for the other panelists. So you know there's going to be somebody who says, how can you go and work with someone who's supposed to be doing the work of Jesus when they don't even know Jesus? So how could they be doing the work of Jesus if they don't know Jesus?
They're doing the work of Jesus without realizing they're doing the work of Jesus.
So what would be an example of doing the work of Jesus and you don't even know you're doing the work of Jesus?
Doing the work of Jesus is simple justice work, whether you're advocating what we've been seeing here in our own community and nationally of people marching, protesting, voicing their concern and their demand for change, for liberation, and for justice for people of color, for black people in particular. That is the work of Jesus. Jesus, I say this often, that word socialist has such a negative connotation a lot of times, well, here now presently, because there's a lot of political gaming that I'm sure Bishop Boyd could explain more. However, Jesus was a socialist. I mean, Jesus, I have yet to read a healing story in the Bible where before Jesus healed, he asked for their insurance card. I have yet to see in the Bible any place where Jesus healed, where Jesus helped somebody, and before he healed them, before he helped them, he asked them for their address. He gave them a form and said, fill this out, and somebody get with you soon. Jesus simply healed, he helped, he delivered, he saved, he fought for the least, the lost, the left out. The God that we serve, the Jesus that we serve, and that right there is a whole nother conversation. But I personally view God, my theology, my personal theology is that God is on the side of the oppressed. And myself being an agent and a representative of God have an obligation and a duty to be on the side of the oppressed and fighting for the oppressed, even if I fall into the categorization of being oppressed myself, doing what I can to grab my fellow brothers and sisters who are in the oppression with me and fighting.
You know, as soon as someone hears that God is on the side of the oppressed, they're going to think that you're promoting liberation theology.
And I am.
Yeah.
And I am, unapologetically, liberation theology. And, speaking of that, Pastor Crenshaw, I believe that it's important that whether you're a white pastor, white church, black pastor, black church, Hispanic, Asian, the liberation theology, black theology is very, very, very imperative for everybody to learn, to at least have some.
And which it didn't even start in the black community, it started in South America.
South America, right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah, so let me ask, we'll come back to it. We'll come back
Pastor,
to it. I want to give them time as well.
Second,
yes, if you all hear something that you want to jump in on, let's do that as well.
Dr. King was one of the greatest prophets that lived as well. I mean, he's outside the Bible, but he spoke truth. He had a negative approval rating, so to speak, when he died. I mean, he went to the grave, assassinated with people in the church opposing his efforts. I was reading an article back in the back again as we were preparing about someone else who was saying that as pastors, we're not always speaking the right messages in church. We're not delivering the right inspirational messages. Everybody knows about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Everybody knows about Daniel and lion's den. But how do you get us out of the fiery furnace now? How do you get us out of the lion dens now? I'm being very frank, very blunt, and I may get in a lot of trouble, but I live in Hoover, so in a few minutes I'll be taking off anyway, getting up out of here. But it was people in the church since 2016, in this community, in this congressional district, in this state, who have come against me for being both a bishop, a pastor, and a political figure. Because they say a person who's in the pulpit should not also be out on the streets. And the last time I read my Bible, I see Jesus more in the streets than I see him in the temple. And when he went to the temple, he ran people out for making the temple something that should not have been. So I think if we look at, as Pastor said, even the life of Jesus, we'd see socialist actions. We would see actions that might lead us to believe he was leaning more in one direction than the other. So we have to be very careful. I studied in one of my doctoral programs, I wrote about, in even one of my books, beyond active leadership, we need active followership. And as pastors, as physicians, as CEOs, as officers, as business owners, as activists, we can stand up all day long and talk about what needs to be done. But until the people follow and help make it work, we're going to just be people who are out for walks, people who are screaming through megaphones and no one's listening. So I think the church, and I'm speaking to the church now, I think the church has to do a better job at not trying to silo pastors into saying you only preach, pray, and you go home. You only visit me on the sick bed, the deathbed, and you go home. Pastors were honored in the civil rights movement because, as I've received death threats, you've heard other panelists say they received death threats, they didn't just stop when somebody called their house and said, I want to kill you because of your beliefs. They kept going. And right now we have people that say, well, if you're not preaching, if you're not, teaching, then we don't want you to lead. I can't wait for this election cycle to be over because I'm tired of you being on the front lines. But now in the era that we're in, and people are dying on the streets saying they can't breathe, they're saying, when are you going to get back out? So it's funny, we really need to get it together in the church, in our communities, and support African-American leaders who are willing, like every one of these leaders, to put our necks on the line, and let's stop being critical of ourselves first. That's the first thing we need to deal with before we even go out and try to change the world.
I think that's a part of that cultural conditioning. I'm coming, Camille. I think that's a part of the cultural conditioning that even our own people try to limit our own people from moving outside certain confines that people want to limit African Americans to.
I just want to piggyback off of what Dr. Boyd and Pastor Wesley were saying about, first of all, I'm really grateful to hear, Pastor Wesley, your approach to activism in 2020, your acknowledgement of the diversity that's necessary. And Dr. Boyd, you spoke to Dr. Martin Luther King. We quote him all the time, but I think we miss the actual movement that he created, how expansive it was. And he was a singular figure at that time, but when you talk about Montgomery and what happened in Montgomery, it was the Women's Political Council that set the stage. They set up the boycott. They did all of the footwork, and at the time, they couldn't step up and be that central figure because of sexism, right? Dr. King rolled with Bayard Rustin, so that I Have a Dream speech, the man that set the platform and got all the people there, the chief organizer was a gay man. And not to mention, Dr. King was even expansive in his faith. He endorsed Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Buddhist. So I say all that to say, when we talk about civil rights and we talk about what it should look like, I think right now what we're experiencing was Dr. King's vision that we just weren't ready for back then. So it's coming into fruition now, and I'm so grateful that it is, because I can sit here at this panel that still underrepresents Black women in leadership.
And just a quick second, that beloved community that Dr. King so often spoke of, we as a church, if there's any perfect opportunity that we take what I do believe is our rightful place in leading the efforts on the outside of the church when it comes to social justice and fighting racism, it's now. Everything is pushed outside. We're in a pandemic. Churches can't meet inside, except for today because of the rain. I've been having church outside. I know many other congregations and churches have been having church outside. We haven't been inside the comfortable confines of our church buildings for almost 4 months because this pandemic has literally pushed things outside. Not only are we in a pandemic, we are in the midst of protests that are taking place. We're outside the streets of New York City, the streets of Baltimore, the streets of LA, the streets of Atlanta, streets right here in Florence, Alabama. People are outside doing the work. And if it's one thing that the church, when things are comfortably available inside, it's one thing for the church to not do right and be on the outside, but there is simply no excuse right now where our entire world is literally forced outside because of pandemic and protests. If we still can't be outside with them, that's a problem.
I totally agree. I was telling our congregants this morning that we have to be a global congregation that moves not just locally, regionally, nationally, but on a global scale. And that's what the Lord has called us to do. Bishop Boyd, Having served as an elected city councilman in Illinois, chairman of Lauderdale County Democratic Executive Committee, 2016 nominee for our congressional district, and the 2018 Democratic nominee for Lieutenant Governor of Alabama, how do you feel politics can effectively address racism and injustice in our nation?
Politics is more than putting people into office. By definition, politics is basically the whole idea of decision making from a corporate perspective, as you just heard mentioned. We have to look at politics as a means to bring many different people to the table who don't look like us, think like we do, but as we come together as one team, we're better able to represent. We can't talk about an American dream and everyone pursuing happiness if we don't first understand what makes people happy. We can't talk about how to reach an attainable goal if we don't know what people are striving to reach. We need to have people in office who want to see educational equity, excellence in terms of ethics. We need people who are concerned about economic development. But we can't, as we hear said all the time, legislate morality. Neither can we legislate racism or the lack thereof. But if we get people in office who have beliefs and core values that we share, people who understand that maybe I don't agree with your lifestyle, but we're headed in the same direction. We need to work side by side. People who say, maybe I didn't grow up on the same side of the world or tracks you did, but we want to see our nation move forward. Until we get to that point in our decision making, as we just heard again said, where more women are represented at the table, we're in trouble. One of the greatest political groups, I shouldn't say a political group, but one of the greatest unions that is in this area, I won't call their name now that I've identified them with politics, but one of the things that they've done is they've made sure that women are paid exactly the same as men. Right now, it's about $1. Every dollar a man makes, 80 cents is what the female makes. They're doing the same jobs. Why is that today? We are talking about racism, but I've seen, if I could just move off for a second, I'll give the mic over to someone else. I've seen the enemy work, if I could say it that way. Even in foreign countries, when people have the same shade of skin, someone will come in from another nation and say, well, the bridge of your nose looks different. So as a result, 300,000 people end up massacred. And then we wonder, how did we get here? We always find ways to divide each other up. Well, I don't like him because he's a Presbyterian and not a Baptist, or she's an Episcopalian and not a Catholic. We have to stop being divisive and, from a political point of view, look at unity. And that's what we do. That's what I've done. That's what I believe our panelists do. We strive hard to try to pull our people, not just a certain group, but people together and say, how can we reach our shared goals?
Thank you, Bishop. Officer Johnson, for many years we've heard about encounters between young black men that did not go well, and I would even add black women. Because a lot of times when we talk about the police shootings, we talk about black men, but we have to also include black women as well. Because of technology, now we're able to view many of those encounters and form a perspective of those videos. The high-profile encounters that didn't go well are plentiful. Freddie Gray, Philando Castile, Terrence Crutcher, Alton Sterling, Walter Scott, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Pamela Turner, Yvette Smith, Corinne Gaines. These encounters did not go well. How can young black men and young black women survive encounters with the police?
Let me go to my notes because it's very important that I try to relay this. First of all, the one encounter that I'm going to talk about are police traffic stops where the police car pull you over. First of all, I want everyone to know that the police officers use traffic stops to conduct investigations. They have to have something that the legal system called PC, probable cause. So officers use probable cause to make traffic stops, to conduct investigations, to look for stolen equipment, stolen guns, drugs, impaired drivers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought that it was important for you to know why police officers make those traffic stops. And it's important also that you understand that when a police officer is conducting these investigations or making these stops, probably about 80% of the people that are pulled over are not cited. And of course, they use the Alabama traffic code to determine, hey, this guy doesn't have a tag, we're gonna pull him over and see what's going on with him. And while we have him stopped, we're gonna talk to him, we're gonna look and see what we see, we're gonna smell and see if we smell anything illegal, etc. We're gonna run his name, make sure he's not a wanted person. But first of all, during a traffic stop, the driver, when he's been signaled by the police by the use of the blue lights and our siren, you need to immediately pull over to the right-hand side of the road. That's very simple to do. I know a lot of people feel like, hey, I need to continue until I'm around a lot of people or a well-lighted area for my safety and maybe the officer's safety. That's fine, that's cool. But as soon as you can, immediately pull over to the right-hand side of the road. Once you pull over, doing that contact with the officer, we need to remember, limit our movements inside the car. The law provides officers the right, if an individual's pulled over and people were in the car doing a lot of moving, reaching up under the seat, going to the glove box, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the law has given officers the right to ask the occupants of the car to exit the vehicle and for the officer to check the interior of the car. Wingspan is the legal term that they use for maybe weapons. It's an officer safety issue. The courts have given police officers the right to do that. When the officer makes contact with you as the driver, just simply talk to him as if you would want a person to communicate with you. If it's nighttime, if you simply turn on your dome light, that will more than likely de-escalate a situation if you have an officer that's really nervous or afraid. I have it happen to me all the time. The driver turns on the dome like, oh, wow, okay, I can see the whole interior of the car. This person isn't trying to hide anything. They're not going to be the one probably to try to hurt me. So if you can de-escalate the situation by activating your dome light, try to answer any questions, if possible, pertaining to the traffic stop. Yes, you have the right to remain silent. Yes, you can do that. But probably that officer is going to detain you a little bit longer. I'm not saying anything, you want to know where I'm coming from.
Officer Johnson, so for most police officers that you know of, if that person remains, because you just said that's an option to remain silent, if they remain silent, is there a greater potential to escalate the situation?
It should not be on the officer's behalf. It should not be on the officer's behalf. If a person doesn't want to talk, they're having a bad day, whatever, the officer should get by that. Should get by that. Should. However, a lot of times officers don't stop people because of traffic violations. He may have gotten a call, and the driver of that car, I'm sure doesn't always know the type of information or the call that he got on his vehicle. And if he stops his vehicle that fits the description and the general area where something has taken place, and the driver doesn't know that, and the driver decides, you know what, I'm not answering any questions, here's my license, Here's my insurance. Here's my registration. I have nothing to say. Well, of course, with the officer not being able to communicate with the driver, you're probably going to be detained a little bit longer until he can find out what he needs to know, that you are or are not involved in whatever particular crime that, the call may be about. That's why I say, if you're pulled over and there's conversation pertaining to the stop, I understand if you don't want to talk, but the best thing to do is to communicate with it.
Do you have to show your identification?
State law says when you're driving a car and you're pulled over, that you have to produce your driver's license, the vehicle's registration, and the vehicle's insurance. You have to do that. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. So, Mr. Buchanan, we are living in some unprecedented times. Our country has been rocked through a pandemic that has taken many lives and caused a lot of people to get sick. Have you noticed during this time any racial disparities and inequities in the healthcare system?
Sure. So I'll maybe refine a little bit. So our country has been rocked. We're currently being rocked more than ever today. So we often get the question of where are we in this process. We think...
now, Ms. Buchanan, you said we are being rocked. Could you tell us why?
Oh, because I use some simple numbers. We've got 17 patients in the hospital today with COVID. We've never had 17. We've got more patients today in the hospital in North Alabama we've ever seen in this region. We've got more patients in the hospital across our state than we've ever seen today than any other part in this process. So we are not only, we think, seeing unprecedented times and activity. Quite frankly, we think the next couple of weeks could be worse.
Wasn't this supposed to go away in the summer?
It didn't. Yeah, I mean, we're learning about this virus every day, and it did not go away as strongly than ever. But yes, we are seeing racial disparities. Some of the data points we've noticed here in the shoals, and I can use our numbers as an example, we haven't seen as distinct a set of racial disparities as most places. So we've seen largely about 15 to 20% of our patients who are admitted with COVID are persons of color. Actually, take that back, AfricanAmerican. Another 20 to 25% are of Latino communities, and the rest are white. So the majority of our patients we're seeing in our hospital are middle-aged white people. And that's one thing that I say often in public, and it's like, really? 50-year-old white men are the most represented group who are being impacted most by COVID today in the shoals, and that's true. Now, nationally, we're seeing a different story. And nationally, we've seen, of course, African Americans and others who are, one, essential workers, two, most likely to have comorbidities and other diseases that make them more susceptible to COVID and being impacted at a more acute level. So in those situations, and I've got family in South Alabama, they have a black church was decimated. My mom's black church was decimated by COVID very early in the process, just because, one, we didn't know some of the things we needed to do in late February, and the community was just so at risk for it. So yes, to answer your question, we've seen that nationally. Locally, we've seen a slightly different story, but we're also being very careful to make sure that in our black community, we're doing the things that we need to do as well.
I think I heard you say on a conference call that churches can, and African-American churches really need to be mindful of this, can be super spreaders.
Absolutely. We've seen some examples. Rome, Georgia is one in which a very early in the process, a choir member had COVID with no symptoms. And they had a couple of services after the shutdown became clear. And I think they had 4 or 5 people from that choir who passed away in the weeks following, just because they became so sick so quickly because of that event. So absolutely, church services can be super spreader events.
So, Dr. Jones, I'm going to ask the same question of you in regards to the unprecedented times we're living in. Have you noticed any racial disparities and inequities in the healthcare system, or within your practice?
Not so much related to COVID, but overall in general, there is a clear health gap between African Americans, other people of color, and our Caucasian counterparts. And so when the data came out, I think late April, early May, regarding the huge disparity of African American people of color being affected with COVID, it followed the same trend lines that we've been seeing. And just hospital-wide, probably the number one characteristic is obesity. And I think that that's maybe the reason why we see that characteristics in Caucasians and African Americans in the southern region, because we know the southern region in general has a high level of obesity and diabetes. But looking at nationwide, I mean, that's what we see in our African American counterpart. We see cardiovascular disease, we see obesity, we see diabetes, we see hypertension. All are characteristics that was listed in that CDC report that came out late April, early May, which followed the trends. These are trends that's been in existence, which follow cardiovascular diseases in general. And so I think with the death rate amongst the minority community, it resembles the death rate we see with cardiovascular disease. It's just a high population of African Americans. So we was already behind the 8 ball before COVID came out. And and that's just a whole other discussion about why is there such a huge health gap between African Americans and our counterparts.
I'm going to stay with both of y'all for one more question, and then I'll come back a little later with another follow-up. How do you view the present presidential administration's handling of COVID-19 crisis as it relates to these inequities? Think they're doing a good job, not doing a good job? What are some of the things they could do or do better? You commend them. What's your perspective?
My biggest hang-up from a medical standpoint is, for one, I practice evidence-based medicine. And so I go where the evidence takes me. And if the evidence is clearly showing that wearing face coverings is a helpful effort in reducing the transmission of this virus, I think that should be something that should be pushed heavily. It should be endorsed by the government, and not seeing that makes me feel a particular type of way. Considering that I'm one on the front lines battling this virus on a daily basis, and to see I'm not getting support from government officials is troubling, so to speak. And it's also troubling that people who haven't put the time into studying this field of medicine can easily make comments online in front of cameras, endorsing certain medications, endorsing certain therapies that not only has it been shown to be beneficial, but it's been shown to be harmful in some cases. It irritates me, and I'm gonna just leave it at that.
But Dr. Jones, before you pass that mic off, how do you feel about the conspiracy theories that exist in regards to COVID-19, as you say, the various treatment? How do you think we can overcome that?
I think with overwhelming focus on the healthcare professionals and what they're saying on a regular basis. Drown out the noise and listen to what the healthcare professionals are saying. People who, like I said, dedicated their lives, majority of their lives, to studying this craft and practice evidence-based medicine. I think that's the only way that we can push through the weeds. And I'll just give you a perfect example. Often I find myself on social media correcting people who put out false narratives.
So you're actually doing work.
Yes,
to reverse the conspiracy.
I actually sit down and type whole essays on people's Facebook page explaining that what they're saying is incorrect, it's harmful, and they should put a cease to it. And I think that's the only way. And even even someone who's not in the medical field should stand up to information they see their loved ones or friends put out there saying certain things and say, no, don't put that out there. You could be harming someone. Because honestly and truly, they can be. When people say that they saw on Facebook that elderberries and cayenne peppers, if it goes down your throat, will go kill the virus. That's absolutely wrong, and you hurt people who take that information and run with it.
So I saw at the city council meeting a lady got up and she said, "Y'all are killing me because you're making me wear a mask, and that mask is going to kill me." So what would you say to that?
Now, I don't know what type of respiratory illness this patient, I'm assuming, is claiming they have, but for the most part, not only does the mask help protect you, but it really helps you protect you from passing the illness, because we know that people are asymptomatic carriers, not knowing that they have this illness, walk around day in and day out. And I know some personally, a person that's in my environment who totally asymptomatic, just so happened was tested and came positive, blew their mind. And I say that to say, so that's where wearing the mask is beneficial. Yeah, and I had a conversation with a patient. She said, I just don't like it. I don't believe it. Well, believe in your 90-year-old mother who has comorbid issues. Believe that if she gets it, she will not do as well as you do. Believe that. So don't be selfish in the idea that it's causing you so much distress. Have a little compassion for your fellow human and wear the mask.
Wow, I could have probably taken the same stab, but I would have mentioned the 98% of what Dr. Jones did. But I'll add a couple things to it. So one, I think we're talking about linked issues. So if you put a billboard on front of the church, you say, everyone who believes that racism and systemic racism does not exist, come into the church tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning, right? And then if you say on Tuesday, I want everybody who believes that COVID is fake news and we shouldn't wear a mask, blah, 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 come into the church Tuesday morning. I bet you're going to see the same people in this church both mornings. It is amazing to me to see, as he mentioned, COVID is science. It's not politics. It doesn't matter if I'm a mayor or whatever. If I go to Lowe's and not wear my mask and I come in contact with 15 people and I'm COVID positive, chances are several of those folks will catch the disease, period. I don't care what you believe, that's just gonna happen. And we've created a society, I'm afraid, in which true facts don't matter. And real issues that and real experiences that people have, and they jump up and we say, racism isn't a thing in the past. This is my personal experience in Tuscumbia, in Muslim Shoals. And for people to say, oh, well, that really didn't happen. All of that is one, in my mind, big issue with our society in general, is that we don't really embrace the truth and deal with it in a real way to move forward. Racism, COVID, several other items in that bucket that we just, as a society, don't deal with in a real way.
So you're telling me that you do not believe in alternative facts?
I do not believe in alternative facts. Truth is truth.
It is, and I believe in absolute truth, and I believe in empirical data. It is what it is, but yet there are people who try to overlook that. Thank you all again. I'm going to move to another question, and I wanted to ask Camille, if you would, to kind of elaborate on what is tokenism and how do black people contribute to it, and is it a form of racism?
So I'm going to use Malcolm X's quote to just talk about tokenism. Malcolm X says, all you have gotten is tokenism. One or two Negroes in a job or at a lunch counter so the rest of you will be quiet. Tokenism is when you are selected by white people to perform a specific task or be in a specific group or be on a specific job, and you're just that, you're a token. So you're supposed to represent the rest of black people. Tokenism is something that white people use. And tokenism is something that black people protect. When you have white people who are consciously saying, okay, you know, I understand that our police department, or that black people in Florence City make up over 20% of the population, but they're underrepresented and we only have 3 or 4. And I'm not saying that that's intentional, but that's how tokenism can function. Or if you go into the courthouse and you see underrepresentation of black people, but you maybe see 1 or 2. So tokenism is at play. But the way we as black people protect it is we're okay with it. So oftentimes, and it's really an epidemic around here, you have black people in leadership positions or black people who actually get those higher positions and are content with being the only ones, and actually do not take steps to open doors to make sure that there are many black people to follow. I'll tell you an example, a real life example of how tokenism was disrupted here recently. You have Dr. Gail Satchel. She spoke at the NAACP rally, and she openly said, as a superintendent, she's asked not to hire so many black people. That was an open dismantling of tokenism. So perhaps she was hired to be a token, but it looks like she kicked the door down. Now, what followed that speech was white lash. And I think that's what keeps us protecting our tokenism. It's the fear of losing, the fear of white lash, of losing your position, of being threatened, of being harmed, of losing, of not being able to survive and feed your family. But what if every black leader in just our area, the Shoals, started to dismantle tokenism the way Dr. Satchel did? What if we all stood on stages and talked in depth about the racism we experience? And I want to go back to racism too and how we define it. So oftentimes when we talk about racism, we think about feelings and how we're treated. And my definition of racism has nothing to do with feelings or how I'm treated, and everything to do with systems of power and wealth. So if you look at it from that lens and you look at the Shoals, is there systemic racism? How many black businesses do you see? How much wealth do you see? And what does the poverty gap look like? Or what do the AP classes, advanced placement classes, look like? What does the suspension rate in the schools look like? That's where you're able to really, more importantly, what does West Florence look like? Is it a food desert? You got a gas station? Any businesses? So you can definitively say that racism is alive and well, and I even say embedded in the structures of this community. White supremacy exists and is meant to be there on purpose. So tokenism is one of the ways it plays out.
So do you think when tokenism is in place that there are black people who get in a position and they are potentially a token black person, hired for that particular reason? Do you think they feel as though they either have to go one way or the other? I have to try to be still black so that I can still connect to my black culture, or do I have to go all the way and try to do my best not to fit the typical stereotypes that may be connected to my black culture?
That's a great question. I think in order to dismantle tokenism, you have to dismantle what they call a stereotype threat. You can't yield to stereotype threats. So if you are that one black person in the room and you're afraid of wearing your Afro puff, you're yielding to a stereotype threat, right? Or if you're afraid of playing your rap music or whatever stereotypes they want to put on you, that's one way to really protect your tokenism. So you're trying to like assimilate into this space that's really often potentially dangerous for you anyway. I'll also say, if you are a token and you are the only black person in that space, then the stakes are really tough. They're really high, because more than likely, whether you notice it or not, you are experiencing systemic racism on a very regular basis. And I'll also say that tokenism functions too, where you're actually asked to be a spokesperson for black people. I just getting ready to
ask you that. So do you become the representative for all black people? So how do black people feel about what just happened to O.J. Simpson? How do black people feel about what just happened to George Floyd? So you become the representative.
Absolutely, and so that's a lot of pressure, right? So the way I see that play out in our community is, because you're the representative, if someone like myself, an activist, is out there protesting, yelling, saying Black Lives Matter, and really dismantling white supremacy, and you walk into the workplace and you're trying to protect your tokenism, and someone asks you, well, what do you think about that? You might soften your answer, or you may be afraid to answer at all just to survive. It doesn't mean... that's not to diminish who you are, but it's to say that's a survival mechanism.
I'm glad you used the word survival, because
you must do that. But to understand that we can survive in a different way, in a new way, and if you are like Dr. Satchel and take that step and say, you know what, I'm going to step out and tell the truth anyway, it gives other leaders the permission to do the same.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was glad you used the word survival, because I heard someone talking the other day and they went back to slavery and how some of the things that went on in slavery, we see extensions of that today, and one of them is the survival mechanism, because at times an educated slave could not let it be known that he or she was educated, because they may get whipped or they may actually lose their life. So they actually had to, at times, for a survival reason, dumb down their education or their intellectual capabilities. I would also ask, let me just make this statement and see what you think about it. One of the wealthiest men in Alabama, A.G. Gaston, pioneer black insurance company millionaire from Alabama, once said, I quote, I'd rather be able to say I is rich than I is poor, end quote.
I don't know. I'm trying to figure out where you're going with it.
Stereotypes. Because you would think with him saying that, no, you need to speak proper English, man. You need to be articulate. But if you heard what he said, I'd rather be rich than be able to say I is poor. And so sometimes what you find within that tokenism is that some people think that you have to go down this certain path to fit this certain stereotype. But as you're saying, you can overcome that.
You absolutely can. And for anyone who's listening, if you are selected to be that token, understand your role and the direct action that can be taken, which is to open doors for other black people. If you are the only black person in the room, you have no power. You only have power if you can open the door for other black people to come and have a seat at the table.
Because some people may go in and they may hear this. You're not like those other black people. Mm-hmm. You know, you don't talk like the other black people that I've been around. You are a good black person that I feel very comfortable being around. And what I'm discovering since I started reading the book that you turned me on to by Robin DiAngelo and White Fragility is some people love to be comfortable within their whiteness. And so we have to decide, am I going to be uncomfortable for somebody else to be comfortable? Or am I going to speak up and I'm going to say something, even though it may make somebody else uncomfortable? So I asked another question in that area. How do you define black exceptionalism? And is it something that is actually a myth?
When I think about black exceptionalism, I think I'm a Generation Xer, so I'm 42. And this is not to throw shade at my ancestors or my parents, but what we were taught, or what I was taught was, look, we did all this marching back in the day. Look forward. Go to school, get a job. Don't look at those prison rates. Don't look at all this crack dealing and all this kind of thing. You get out there and you go get it, which is beautiful. And I think my ancestors or the people that raised me really didn't want us to look at that pain. But the truth is, now in 2020, and we see what we're going through, pretty much a modern day race war with a white supremacist president, and we've taken we really haven't taken that many steps back, but it's in our face now. When we look at it, we really need to identify and study all of the statistics, all of the wealth inequities that show us exactly where we are today. And the truth is, when it comes to wealth, which that's how I define racism, wealth, a division of wealth and power and that kind of thing. When you really look at those resources, opportunities, when you really look at that, you understand that black people as a whole have not made any progress since slavery. That's the hard truth. So I don't want to hear about Beyonce and Oprah and Jordan and all these. I want to hear about the children in the housing projects. So I think black exceptionalism, when people use it, and I see black people use it all the time too, right? When I want to talk about enslaved black people, when I want to talk about what happened to us in the past, and black people quickly say, well, why we got to talk about slavery? We moved past that. We're congressmen, but then when I look at my Jewish brothers and sisters who proudly, and never let us forget the Holocaust, right? So that speaks to why racism is so normalized here. That's why we can fly Confederate flags and have Confederate monuments that were put up specifically to intimidate black people, because not only do white people not have a problem looking back, black people have a problem looking back. So we really want to look at that exceptionalism, and we do it to ourselves, and white people do it to us all the time. So oftentimes when I talk about having an organization that is here to dismantle white supremacy, many people who knew how I grew up say, hey, Camille, really? Like, your dad owned 3 car dealerships. Really? You went to college, really? I mean, you're like the typical, or they'll say like you're the whitest black girl I've ever met. So so I'm the exception, right? But the truth is, regardless of my educational background or socioeconomic background, I experience systemic racism every single day. And even if I didn't, my people do. So it's my responsibility.
Everyone within that group should matter.
Yeah.
Everyone. And I say that, and I get a response from everybody up here. Because sometimes when I'm talking to people, what they want to do is go to a black person that's supposed to represent all black people or represent a group of black people that, as I said, they can feel comfortable with. And one of those persons is Candace Owens. And I don't know if you saw what she said about George Floyd, but she reduced him. At the point of this man dying, she reduced him to a thug. So I'm not going to make a martyr out of him. It really didn't matter. What he did, he got what he deserved. And so I would ask you all, how would you feel hearing somebody make a statement like that? Because I know how I feel, and I'm going to respond to that, but I want to let you all talk about that first.
So I saw Ms. Owens' Facebook video.
Got over 7 million views.
Yeah, and I was almost to a point, and I actually did stop it a few times and thought, okay, I've heard enough. Then I made myself listen to the rest of it because I wanted to really tried to wrap my mind around what she was saying. But black people are different in that we have a collective, or should always have perhaps, a collective energy around us that absolutely should, and this is what she really shunned, absolutely should stick up for all of us, not just
Yeah, she shot that down. She's like, there's no way. Yeah, no way. There's no way I'm joining you all in this because he's not the right black person to stand
because he's imperfect.
up for. Yeah.
Because he's imperfect, and I would challenge us to continue doing that. I mean, for the folks who have a voice, for the folks who don't have a voice, for the folks who have different roles and are in business, who are out front in the activist community, or pushing in different ways. Everybody does their part for all of us, and we all win. Her idea that we should only do that for I guess, perfect people.
A stand-up black person, an exceptional. If we go back to that, an exceptional black person would be somebody maybe she would say, oh yeah, I'll stand up for him, but not for someone like him.
Well, all of us should see some of ourselves in George Floyd. At that moment, we should all see ourselves, or our son, or our father, or our brothers, in him as he died. And that is what galvanized us, as well as many others, as allies, to stand up in that moment.
I would add, not only see ourselves in George Floyd, but I would say see God in George Floyd. Because for me, we're created imago Dei. We're created in the image of God. And so being that we're created in the image of God, we should respect that image. I don't care who it is. I don't care what level that person is on. Because they're created in the image of God, we must respect that image. That's what I teach the police cadets. If you respect the image of God that's in another human being, then there's certain things that you're just not going to do, and that's treat a person in an inhumane way. I hear from the rest of you all.
I could not watch that video of Candace Owens. We just talked about tokenism, so I see Candace Owens as tokenism unleashed. Like it's the most extreme version of tokenism. I'm not quite sure she believes herself what she's saying, but I do understand what she represents right now. And she has been given a position to be conservative black woman at the height of white supremacy within politics, and to really protect white supremacy and to do it to kind of like wrangle in the blacks. And is she doing a great job? No. Most black people don't really buy what she's selling. But I would say professionally, maybe she is, right? Because her base, which are white conservative people with views who support white supremacy, she's doing a great job with them. I can't tell you how many times I've had someone who doesn't agree with the way I teach quote Candace Owens and say, let me show you this video, let me educate you for a minute. So she's actually doing a great job in that area. But do I believe that she believes all of that? I don't. I think that it's beneficial.
Yeah, because I told someone, I said, have you looked at her history? Did you see how she got started? Do you remember who paid and gave her money during a trial so that she could win that court case? So you checked her history? No, I haven't checked. I said, go check it out. You need to really see who this is. This is a person that was against Donald Trump until she saw, for me, the potential for a lucrative side that she could go to. And that's where I see that you're going with that. Yes. And so any others want to respond to that? Dr. Jones, I see you got the mic.
Yeah, I just want to I think Candace Owens is a perversion of what black conservatism used to be. And
because they've always had one.
Well, yeah, black conservatism has always been around. I mean, we're talking about when Bill Cosby went on his national tour and told young men to pull up their their pants and stop walking around as thugs, and he got standing ovations at every city he went to. That's the black conservatism that, I'm talking about. I think just Candace Owen has taken it, to a whole nother level. And what hurts me, and I agree with, what my fellow panelist Kyle Buchanan said, is that we don't need to tear each other down, and I say that because, like I said earlier, I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and I'm the first in my family to go to college, and it wasn't an easy road as well. I mean, in a snap of a finger or turning down the wrong block, I could have easily been George Floyd. I have a police record, and so my road could have easily been deflated, but it was people around me who stood me up, supported me, and now in the position that I'm in, I believe in fighting white supremacy with taking someone out the village and putting your arms around them and lifting them up, no matter where their circumstances live. They just got released from prison. You don't shun them. No, you lift them up. You give them opportunity. You show them that this is what you have to do to not revert back to that way. And that's the way that we fight those negative stereotypes.
I think all of us are 1 degree, 1 step away from being George Floyd.
Yeah.
I've been on 157 pulled over so many times because of the vehicle that I drive, and it just so happens my windows aren't tinted, and most times I have on a bow tie and a suit. And usually I'm not speeding, but I'm obviously stopped for obvious reasons. In South Carolina, where I was born, one day I went fishing after coming back from the fishing bank, even a young minister. I was stopped, and again, no offense to law enforcement, a lot of my brothers are law enforcement officers. I was stopped, and more than 20 squad cars, officers had guns trained on me because I was an African-American man on a Saturday wearing a ball cap. Now, how many thousands of people is that? Many of them. And so, again, with all of us being 1 step away from George Floyd, what do we do? This is an awesome panelist discussion, but I think what tends to happen sometimes, people say, well, did you come out with any solutions? And one of the things that I think we have to do, and I've done it, I know this group has done it, is everywhere I go, I say ORG, organize, recruit, and get people involved. In that is educating people. And it's no secret I'm a Democrat, and I get beat up for being a Democrat. But one of the things that Democrats have done is introduce 40-hour work weeks, overtime. We've gone in and helped a lot of people who are in poor situations get lifted up. We've tried to expand the middle class, and yet we get labeled. I tell people everywhere we go, stop letting people label us. And not just being a Democrat. If you're an African American, stop letting people label you. Be you. Right. Be the person you are. Recognize your blackness, recognize you're an African American, and don't change for anybody. You were created the way God wanted you to be. But when people define us, and we go into all of these different terms we've used to describe what happens when we're the token, when we're the only one, that's when we get in trouble. Listen to this for just a second. I said this everywhere, and I'll keep saying it. We wonder why. First of all, you talked about health. You talked about obesity. In Alabama, we have the highest gym membership cost with some of the highest obesity levels. In Alabama, we have 900,000 people living in poverty. We haven't expanded Medicaid. We have over 125,000 women who don't have access to health care. We have some of the highest maternity mortality rates, infant mortality rates. And when we start getting into splitting it up, whether we're pro-life or pro-choice, and whether we're for LGBTQ or not, or whether we're for gun rights, and those are just labels that we put out to distract us from what the truth is. And so I think when we leave this place, we ought to say, how do we organize behind efforts like all the panelists have to move us forward? We can't do it by ourselves. We've got to do it together. And it may take time. Evolutions take time. We've got to keep warming our hands over the revolutionary fires, but getting back out on the front lines and fighting. And until we see people with an attitude that I'm coming out of the salt shaker, I'm coming out of the four walls of the church, I'm going to march, I'm going to be on the picket lines, I'm going to be on the front lines of the struggle, we're not going to see the change that we're excited about. And I'll say this and I'll quit. people think, well, it's about getting people signed up and registered to vote. No, you can get people voting, and you can get the wrong person in office and have a problem. I'm going to get in trouble for this. But what bothers me more than a conservative comment that we're hearing talked about tonight is we have in our own congressional district the representative who said about the same things about George Floyd. How is it that we have people like that representing us and we don't do anything to make those changes? So we have to get out and stop just talking about how bad racism is and put people out that aren't doing the right thing.
I think we can do both.
Yes, sir.
I think we need to do both, and we can, and we will do both of those, because you gotta put a name to it. You gotta identify it.
Absolutely.
And develop a strategy to overcome that. Yeah. So with the rest of the time that we have left, we have a few minutes left. Not going to chance to get to all of the questions that we had. So we want to let you all close out with some closing statements or a closing statement with the remaining time that we have left, and we'll let each panelist do that. Give us one strategy as we get ready to close the panel discussion.
One strategy I think we should employ is on a very grassroots level inside the home is encouraging the family unit, giving support to young fathers, letting them know that they don't have to run away from their responsibility and staying in the homes, supporting family units financially. Just recently, I made a pledge with my family. And I'm not talking about my small unit, but I'm talking about grandmother, cousins, uncle. I said, listen, let us all pool our financial resources. Everyone contribute a small amount of money each month, and then every year we support one of our youth as far as getting them into a training school. We're going to support getting them to higher education. Whatever goal they have in mind, they want to do to better themselves, as a family unit, we're going to support them. We're going to make sure that they have as little debt as possible so we continue to build generational wealth, and it's on them to bring it back to the family. I think efforts like that on a grassroots scale is how we get to a better position than where we're at.
I'll say, and one of the things that he mentioned on generational wealth, I'll skip that one since he spoke to it so eloquently. But I'll say two things. One is education. It makes no sense that a graduating senior from anywhere in Alabama, but especially in the Shoals, doesn't know what the cornerstone speech was. There are key elements of, as an adult now, that I look back and I say, why did I never really learn about Alabama history and some of the things that I now realize are key aspects of who we are as a community. And I'm personally going to challenge each of our local superintendents to teach, if nothing else, that one speech. That one speech says a lot about who we are and why the Confederacy was built and why we have monuments in places we have them. And then last but not least, just getting facts and truth out and pushing when people say that facts that we know are real aren't real. COVID, systemic racism, we have to put our foot down and say, okay, no, this is not fake. No, this is not just someone being loud and vocal about something that doesn't matter. These are real issues, and we got to deal with them head on.
Thank you.
As far as the police world, I would say we need to get out and we need to meet our police officers. We need to introduce ourselves to them, get to know them. Police officers are human too. We're not perfect. I've learned a lot of information here tonight from being invited here. I've enjoyed being here. I've learned a lot of information. But I think we just need to get out and talk with our officers, let them know who we are. One thing I tell the kids at one of the schools I work at, talk to the police officers when you see them. If they ever pull you over for something, it's hard to give somebody a ticket that you know what I'm saying? So that's what I would say. That's a strategy that I try to teach the children out here. Talk to the officers. Get to know them. They see you, they'll remember you.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that may be beneficial to our community here and around the state is to raise up and support more intergenerational leaders. I think we tend to see our seniors in one generation and look at the struggles they went through and want to put them up in a historical place. And then we have young people that we might say, well, their generation is so far out we don't understand them. But we have to bridge the generations together. And working together, we can obviously avoid repeating the past.
Yeah, I heard somebody say this, Bishop, and I'm coming, Camille. A lot of times we think, okay, I got this baton, and now I need to pass this on. Once I pass this on to them, I can sit back, just let them run. Why not look at it as, I have a light, and I light your torch,
That's right.
and you start running, and I'll still have my light, and I'll be running
That's
too.
Good. That's good. That's good.
One of the things that I think is one of the strategies that I use all the time is, again, simply being a woman here, a black woman here, choosing to take up space, choosing to lead, and choosing to confront white supremacy here. That within itself is a strategy. And gives other women the permission to do the same. In terms of direct action, you all know we're working really hard to relocate the Confederate monument and remove it from our courthouse. What you need, and I get this question all the time, well, why the monument? You know, we got police brutality, we got wealth inequity, we got redlining, we got all these issues, why the monument? But I believe in chopping it off at the root. And one of the root issues here is a false narrative issue. We've been told, we've been saying a kumbaya story that racism didn't happen here. And the reason we've been told that lie is because there wasn't really any resistance, no protests. Black people weren't coming out the woodwork fighting against systemic racism. So that's one of the things that needs to be dismantled, and we're doing that right now. I will also say that the reason black people weren't coming out the woodwork is because of the demographics. Between Colbert County and Lauderdale County, we make up approximately 13%, right? So we are not Birmingham, we are not Montgomery, and we are not Selma. There are not that many black people here. And I will also add that we have a white nationalist issue here. The League of the South that was actually present during the Charlottesville riots, where someone was killed about a Confederate monument, their headquarters are in Killing. So, right, and so that's, so when I look at the Confederate monument, I just want to touch a minute on what was said when it was erected in 1903. That was during the Jim Crow era. They blatantly said, nowhere are black people, they called us Negroes, granted social equality. They called us the mongrel race. The daughters of Confederate veterans actually, you know, they were very successful during that time. They wanted to dismantle the narrative of the Civil War. They wanted to say it wasn't about slavery.
Lost cause.
The lost cause narrative. They wanted to romanticize the Civil War, and they started by erecting these monuments in front of places that we have to do business and places that we need to seek justice.
Changing textbooks.
Changing textbooks also, thank you. And so let's fast forward to what's happening in 2020. Why is it so important right now? Look at what's being exposed. So through this process, we've seen the white supremacy in our elected officials. We've seen Danny Pettis lie and lie and lie and refuse to even entertain the idea of relocation. We've seen elected officials get up and talk about black people being half-dressed when we talked about the Dred Scott. Our first proposal, when we were trying to get a monument to Dred Scott, we had an elected official say he didn't want to see a half-dressed black man in chains. That was in a public meeting. We have Philip Pettis, who's also an elected official, state rep for District 1. Not only is he standing in the way of this movement, but he's actually trying to pass a bill that penalizes, right? That says that if you move a monument, you need to pay $10,000 a day. We've seen attorneys speak out against it. We've seen nurses. We've seen teachers. We've seen business owners. So, I mean, and not to mention, we have now a counter movement of over 3,000 people. That didn't happen in Birmingham. That didn't happen in Selma. That didn't happen in Montgomery. It's happening right here. We have counter protesters coming out threatening my life. So I think when I think about direct action and why I believe that every black person who is able-bodied, now I understand it's coronavirus and I'm sensitive to that, but who is able-bodied should be out there with us. Look at what's being exposed. If that means anything to you, come on out and support us. We're there every day.
Yeah, thank you. Pastor?
I would simply say, wake people up and pull them in the fight. We are now in a time where more and more people are revisiting history and are calling it what it really is. We've been given this false narrative, this glorified history, if you will, when it comes to we as people, as far as African Americans, but even when it comes to we as a country, this country that was founded upon Christianity. Listen, we have to go back and really look and ask the question, okay, whose Christianity was that? And I know that's a tough question to even hear, but we have to talk about it. We have to get people to wake up and realize that there's still racism. Going back to your first question, that we are not in a post-racial society. Therefore, we have to fight, because get this, and this may ruffle some feathers, we will never totally, completely eradicate racism. It's impossible. And the reason we will never totally, completely eradicate racism is because no matter how much progress you make, there's always going to be some ignorant people in the world. The Bible talks about in Acts chapter 2, where we celebrate the Pentecost, and when Peter preached that powerful sermon, and we always get happy and shout and give God glory, because the scripture tells us that 3,000 people were saved. But what we miss in that is that it says those who received the word, 3,000 people were baptized and saved. And it makes me always wonder, well, how many of it was that, how large was the number that did not receive? Because we praise God over the 3,000 that did receive, but perhaps there were another 3,000 who did not receive, or perhaps there were 6,000 who did not receive. Maybe there were 10,000 who did not receive. Those were numbers of people who did not get it. And as long as we have breath in our bodies, my generation, my children's generations, their children's generations, there's always going to be people who honestly just will never receive it. And as long as you have those people in the world living, you always will have a fight. So we have to make sure that the fight never ends. To fight for the things that not only just affect you, but even though you have not received the brunt of racism, because you know somebody else who has, fight for them. Because you are not LGBTQ, but you know somebody who is unfairly being mistreated because they are LGBTQ. And yes, I'm saying that as a Black Baptist pastor, we have to fight for them as well. Because you see a woman who's being underpaid, you see a woman who is being marginalized, we have to fight. There will always, so it goes beyond racism. It's about equal justice for everybody, because we are all made in God's image.
Thank you all. We're at that point now where if this was Sunday morning, I'd say it's time for the benediction, but this is a panel discussion. And I want to say thank you. If you're at home, give them a hand, and thank God for all of our panelists. They're telling me to look at this camera right here, so let me look right here and say to our listening audience, thank you for tuning in to this first ever panel discussion. As I said, this is the first of many to come. We're going to do this again. I hope you can appreciate the education, the enlightenment, the equipping, and the empowerment that comes out of this panel discussion. As I said, we were not going to agree on everything, but I did promise you that we would have a difficult discussion. You may have heard some things that you agree with or disagree with that made you feel comfortable, made you feel uncomfortable. That's the season that we're in right now, but we have to have this difficult conversation. And so for the next panel discussion that we have, since Camille made mention of it, that women are underrepresented on the panel tonight, the next panel discussion that we have is going to be all women. No offense, gentlemen, but the next panel discussion that we have, it will be all women. So we praise God for everything that he's doing in this season. May God bless you. May he continue to be with you. Join us for our next panel discussion. Don't know the exact date, but we'll make sure it gets on Facebook, and we'll make sure that you know the exact date and time. God bless.
If y'all would just leave your mics in the seats, we'll take care of them. It's snacks and gifts in